Christopher McNabb is a man who was facing charges for the murder of his 2-week-old child in Covington, Georgia. The incident occurred after the child's mother reported the baby missing to the police, and local law enforcement immediately launched a search. The following night, McNabb was seen in front of TV cameras pleading for his child's return, but the next day the child's body was found in a nearby wooded area. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head, and McNabb was subsequently arrested and charged with the murder of his own child. During his trial, McNabb maintained his innocence, but was found guilty of the crime. At his sentencing, McNabb continued to claim his innocence, but the judge allowed him to unknowingly choose his own sentence. McNabb stated that anyone who committed such a crime should receive the maximum sentence, and the judge sentenced him to life in confinement without parole for the crime of malice murder.
You claim you're innocent, so you tell me what sentence the man or woman that you claim did this should receive.
If you ever find out who did them, they deserve to be under the jail.
Okay, so they ought to get the maximum sentence.
Most definitely.
Okay. On the crime of malice murder, I sentence you to life in confinement without parole. On considering the death of
Franklin Williams was a man who had been convicted of multiple felonies, including armed robberies and fleeing from police in Cleveland, Ohio. During his sentencing, Williams repeatedly interrupted the judge, despite being warned more than a dozen times to stop talking. The judge threatened to gag him and eventually ordered Williams' mouth to be taped shut in order to restore order in the courtroom. At a following court appearance, Williams used the opportunity to assert his right to freedom of speech, saying no duct tape and holding up signs with hashtags. Despite the disruptions caused by Williams, the judge was able to hand down a sentence of 24 years in prison. However, the judge later apologized for the use of duct tape and threw out that sentence, appointing a new judge who sentenced Williams to 33 years behind bars. Williams' criminal history and disruptive behavior in the courtroom resulted in a harsh prison sentence, despite his attempts to assert his rights during the trial. The incident also sparked controversy over the use of duct tape as a means of controlling unruly defendants in court.
Freedom of speech, no duct tape, with the hashtag.
Camille Gamut was a woman who was charged with the murder of her boyfriend in Jackson, Mississippi. According to reports, the attack happened during an argument between the two individuals and ended with the boyfriend being violently stabbed to death. Gamut was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. During her trial, Gamut claimed that the murder was in self-defense and that her boyfriend was attacking her. However, she was found guilty of the murder. Gamut disputed the way in which she was portrayed during the trial, claiming that much of the information presented was lies. Despite her claims of innocence, she was convicted and moved on to the sentencing phase of the trial. During this phase, Gamut reportedly interrupted the judge several times and showed no remorse for her actions. The judge responded with scathing words, stating that Gamut had stabbed her boyfriend repeatedly until he was dead, and that he agreed with the family that she should die in prison. Ultimately, Gamut was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her case serves as a reminder of the serious consequences that can result from violent behavior and the importance of seeking help in difficult situations. Kimberly Kaser was a woman who was charged with the murder of her coworker at a Tangle's hair salon in Nassau County, Florida. She had been working under a fake name and was reportedly on the run for 25 years, wanted in several states. She was eventually found after brutally murdering her coworker with scissors and allegedly disposing of her body. After her arrest, Kaser exhibited extremely disturbing behavior while in jail. She would remove feces from her trays and smear them on the walls of her cell, and also began to harm herself by cutting her own throat. During her trial, Kaser had to be moved to a separate room due to her frequent outbursts. She also refused to accept the services of the public defender's office and insisted on having Jolie Cummings, who was her cousin, as her public defender. Throughout the trial, Kaser made false claims about her former public defender and continuously disrupted the proceedings. Despite her behavior, Kaser was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Kaser's case serves as a tragic reminder of the consequences of violent behavior and the importance of seeking help and dealing with problems in a constructive manner. Candria Cook, an 18-year-old from Volusia County, Florida, was found guilty of carjacking charges along with her then 17-year-old boyfriend. They had used a dating app to set up a carjacking, where Cook's boyfriend reportedly shot the victim, leaving him seriously injured. After fleeing the scene and being on the run, the pair attempted another carjacking just 2 days later, but they were caught and arrested. In court, Cook stood in front of the judge for her involvement in the theft and shooting and was found guilty of all 3 charges. She was sentenced to 20 years in state prison, which caused her mother to break down in tears. There was reportedly a miscommunication with the assistant public defender, and Cook and her mother believed that she wouldn't face any prison time. This led to an emotional outburst from her mother when the verdict was read. However, Cook's sentence was later reduced to 11 years in prison. This case highlights the dangers of using dating apps and the consequences of engaging in criminal activities. On 24 June 2014, Jacob Morgan, then 17 years old, was found guilty of starting a house fire that killed a family member in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Morgan was left alone to look after his 14-month-old stepbrother when the incident occurred. Prosecutors claimed that Morgan intentionally set the fire that killed his family member. Morgan appeared in court for a probable cause hearing, where the judge discussed the charges against him. He was eventually offered a plea deal and pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and unlawful neglect of a child. However, Morgan maintained his innocence and claimed that he loved his brother. Morgan was sentenced to 15 years in prison for his involvement in the incident. However, after serving only 7 years, he was released. Further details about the reason for his early release are not provided in the given information. Ignacio Rodriguez was a suspect in the death of his 4-month-old son in San Antonio, Texas. The infant had suffered a fractured skull and severe bleeding to the brain. Rodriguez was the prime suspect and was taken into custody. He faced a capital murder charge but instead pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of intentional or knowing injury to a child causing serious bodily injury. In court, Rodriguez was sentenced to 50 years in confinement. During the sentencing, the baby's mother confronted Rodriguez. She spoke about her other child, and Rodriguez insisted that she tell the truth to their child when she gets older and starts asking questions. He asked her to tell the whole truth and not to lie to their child. However, court officials quickly removed him from the courtroom. Rodriguez will be serving his 50-year prison sentence. The case is a tragic example of child abuse and neglect, and the consequences that come with it. The mother's reaction shows the pain and heartache that comes with losing a child to such a horrific crime. A double murder occurred in Daytona Beach, Florida, where Damon Kemp, the suspect, is charged with killing his 2 roommates. According to the reports, the police were called to investigate a burglary at an apartment complex where Kemp allegedly confessed to the murders. Kemp was originally staying with his 2 roommates when both individuals were shot multiple times in the apartment. The circumstances surrounding the killings are still unclear and further investigations are ongoing. During his bond hearing, Kemp was brought into court in a wheelchair and appeared to be completely ignoring the judge's attempts to get his attention. The judge attempted to conduct Kemp's first appearance, but he did not seem to acknowledge the proceedings. The victim's family members were present at the hearing but found it difficult to watch and had to walk out. Kemp is currently being held in the Volusia County Jail awaiting his trial. The details of the case are still emerging and it is unclear what led to the double murder. However, the incident has caused shock and grief in the community, and the families of the victims are seeking justice for their loved ones. The case is ongoing, and more information will likely be released as the investigation continues. On 7 September 2021, 2 women named Erica Butts and Shanita Cunningham were charged with homicide by child abuse in Somerville, South Carolina. The victim was a 3-year-old toddler who died from injuries inflicted upon her over a period of several weeks. The child's mother, who was a close friend of Butts, had entrusted her with the care of her daughter for 2 weeks, but during that time, the child was subjected to torture and abuse that ultimately led to her death. The evidence showed that the child had suffered from extensive injuries, including broken bones and bruises all over her body, indicating that she had been tortured over an extended period. The timing of the injuries matched the time the child had spent with Butts and her partner, Cunningham. It is impossible to imagine the excruciating sounds that the child must have made during the torture. After a trial, both Butts and Cunningham were found guilty of homicide by child abuse, and the judge sentenced them to life in prison at the State Department of Corrections. The judge deemed this sentence appropriate, given the severity of their crime. Reports state that Butts and Cunningham are serving their sentences at separate prisons. It is a tragic story of child abuse and neglect that highlights the importance of proper care for children and the responsibility that comes with being entrusted with their safety. The loss of the innocent child's life is a heart-wrenching reminder of the consequences of neglect and abuse.